So, my testimony starts pretty simply. My wife and I, we were like, oh, we go to church, and we check off our church card. So, like, every Sunday it was like, okay, if this is you're in hell, and this is you're with God, we were right here. Every single week, we're like, oh, check, go to heaven, check, go to heaven. Oh, we missed a Sunday. I wonder how many Sundays you can miss before you don't go to heaven anymore, right? Because I didn't know. And so, as we grew closer to our friend Jeff that Dustin was talking about, Jeff was like, hey, you should come to church, you should come to church. So we kind of started here and there at church. And then my wife and I had a son. His name was Dexter. And this kid was epic. I mean, we were coming to church, and we were sitting right over there in the second row, because that's where we always sit at 11 o'clock. If you guys want to come sit, that's where we're at. Kanani's nearby always, so. But seriously, like, we sat there, and like, Dexter was this little boy. He was so cute. I mean, I'm biased, but he was so cute, right? He's a baby. Who doesn't love babies? Unless they're 6 months old and older, whatever, But so this kid was amazing. He ate and slept and pooped like a kid, right? That's all babies do. So at 3 months, my wife and I, like, it was 2 days before he was turned 3 months old, and my wife and I were playing with him. She goes like this, and she pushes right here, and his stomach goes. We're like, that was really weird. If you ever take Rice Krispies and squeeze them, that's what it felt like. It was disgusting. And so we were like, kid's got to poop, right? I don't know why my wife's a nurse. I don't know why this means poop and not down here where everything is, Well, my wife was like, he's got to poop. So that night we're like, okay, let's put him in the bath. At 3 in the morning, the kid's screaming, and I'm like, he's got to poop, whatever. So I'm spraying water on him, and he poops. Okay, cool. Still there. Next day's a Sunday, and we're like, okay, I'm calling the pediatrician. I'm like, what do we do? Like, bring him in tomorrow morning. So we go in the next morning, and they lay him down, and he's just laying there, and he's like a kid, whatever. And he's just like, and they're like poking him, listening, poking him. They're like, we should go to the hospital. So we go to the hospital, and they're like, we need to do an ultrasound. I'm like, see if he has a baby or what, And so they're like, and so I'm like, cool. The next day they come in and they go, you need to sit down. So I'm already sitting. My kid has a crib, so like a huge room, and like there's this crib and a chair, and my wife's sitting here. The doctor sits down, and I'm just sitting Indian style on this crib, and my wife is sitting there, and the doctor goes, and she's holding in every emotion she's got in her body. And she goes, your son Dexter has cancer. My kid is 3 months old to the day. And they said, your son has cancer. And I lost it. I'm a guy who's like, I don't cry, what? I'm a man, I don't cry, what else, But I'm like, I'm bawling. From my face, I'm leaking. I'm like, yeah. And my wife's standing there, and I go up to her. She's holding our son, and I give her a hug. And at this moment, remember, I'm not here, I'm right here. I'm right here with God. And I walk up to my wife, and I hug her, and the only thing I can say is, God, I need you. In this very moment, I said, God, I need you. And in my head, clear as day, God said to me, I have been here the whole time. Where have you been? And I was floored. I was hugging my wife. The only thing I could think from that moment was like, honey, I'm not going anywhere. We're getting through this. So my son, 4 days later, starts chemo. This kid is this big, right? He's this big and poops, and that's all he does, right? He eats and he poops, and apparently now he takes chemo. They're giving this kid chemo. He is tiny, and they're pumping bags of chemo through my kid, and it's poison. And I'm sitting in the bathroom. This bathroom is massive, and I'm sitting in the shower, bawling my eyes out, because I wanted to have one more day they didn't have to have chemo. Well, before we started, as soon as we found it, we could go like this and push into his stomach. 3 days later, it was out here. His cancer was growing so fast, his stomach was protruding out. And the doctor comes in, she's like, we need to go now, like right now. So they did a biopsy, and they put a port in, and it went here, it went all the way around here, and back into his heart. This little kid, who's this big, has a hole that's ready to be poked daily to put meds in. And I'm just like, oh my goodness. The doctor comes in, he's like, your life is going to change, just so you know. And I'm like, but I hate change, right? He said, do you like being other places? Because you're going to be other places 3 to 5 days a week for the next unforeseeable future. And I am sitting there, and I'm like, oh my goodness. I'm looking at my son, he's just like, nah, it's cool, whatever. He's just taking chemo, he's taking poison in his body. He's just like, oh, I wish I could suck on my thumb. Because he had a board on his arm so he wouldn't get all the IVs all pulled out. And he's just like, oh man, I want my thumb so bad. And I'm like, I'm bawling, I'm crying. And I'm like, this is so horrible. And so we start chemo after chemo after chemo. After 3 months, we're like, okay, let's check it out. And I'm still remembering that moment where God's like, I'm with you the whole time, where have you been? And I'm like, this is so amazing. I mean, giving it to God, everybody was like, man, are you okay? I'm like, I'm okay. And I'm putting on this mask of like, dude, I'm fine, whatever. I deal with everything with humor. I don't know if you guys can figure this out or not. But everything I do is humorous to me. Dealing with a child with cancer with humor pisses a lot of people off. But they get over it. But this kid did such an amazing thing through God. God took this little boy who we had to have, they said his platelets are at 200. He needs to be at 600 tomorrow. They said, we'll probably have to delay it 2 or 3 days. I called some friends. I called Jeff's wife and I said, Miranda, I need you to pray. This woman has like 8,000 Facebook friends. And I may not be exaggerating. But she knows so many people. And she goes, I got you. And so this kid, the next day they show up, they take his blood and they went, he's at 1,800. They went, we have never seen this in our lives. The most we've seen is 400 overnight. This kid jumped, 14 or 1,600 points overnight. And I'm like, boom, God, have you seen him? No, it's cool. I'm just like, because I'm kind of pompous sometimes. But I'm like, it's so amazing. We have God. And so we're pumping through chemo. And I'm like, man, we're doing awesome. And they switch hospitals on us. I'm like, all right, so we're going to a different place, same doctors. I'm like, okay, I hate new places. Great, here we go. Let's spend 8 hours here. And so I'm like, okay, we're in a routine, and my son's growing. He's growing up. This kid's getting so much chemo, and he still has hair because he had so much cancer that it will only attack the cancer and not his hair, because chemo attacks whatever grows fastest. His cancer was eating him to death. And so I was like, oh my goodness, this is so tough. I mean, looking at this little boy who's doing so amazing, always so happy, he's doing great. But I'm not. But I'm leaning on God. My wife's leaning on me, and apparently my dad wanted to lean on me too. I'm like, no, you can get away. Let's go. You're a big boy. But so I'm like leaning on God, and my wife's leaning on me, and I'm like, this is so tough. This is so hard. And then they were like, okay, now your son's tumor's down like, I think it was 45 or 50%. Now we got to do it again. Some more chemo. It was down, I think it was 80%. It was a massive number. They're like, now we can cut into your son, and we're going to whack his liver out. I mean, just a big portion of it. We don't have a little bit left, And so I was like, all right. So we go to the doctor, and they're like, okay, we're going to have to push your stuff back. The doctor needs to do a transplant. And I was like, oh, man, we're waiting. I'm not a patient man. And so we wait. My son gets there, and he's doing great. He hasn't eaten since midnight. It's 4 p.m. And I'm like, oh, poor kid. Poor kid. And they take it, they pick him up, they carry him to the OR. And my kid loves going places. He was like, all right, let's go. I may be hungry, but I'm going to crap, It's like, I'm going to be asleep. I don't even know it, but I'm going to be asleep. And so they lay him down, and they cut from over here, past his belly button, over to here. This kid has a gash. He's this big now, and he's got a gash that big. And I'm like, holy crap, what do we do? The doctor said, you're going to spend between 10 to 14 days in this hospital for your son to recover. And I was like, oh no, I hate hospitals, guys. I hate them. So we get done with surgery. Dustin was sitting there. I said to the nurse, can I see my son's liver? And they were like, huh? They bring us the liver in a bucket. It was awesome. Dustin saw it. I have pictures if you want to see. I will really show you. And so it was crazy. So they're like, okay, you go back and see your son. He's doing okay. So we go back there, and we go to this long hallway. I go in there, my son is going, and his chest is caving this much. I thought my son was dying. He had this mask, and it went like this, and I was like, my son is gonna die. I thought this was the moment. And God was like, I got you. Calm down, grab your son's hand and be a man. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'll be a man, I gotta be a man. And so all these people come in, and my dad's girlfriend almost passes out. It was kind of funny. She's like, and I'm like, you okay? Don't die, you know? And so, like, this kid is supposed to be in the hospital for 10 days. I'm like, can we move to a regular room? Can we move to a regular room? They're like, why do you want to move to the regular room? I was like, because the peds ICU means he needs monitored. A regular room means he's not. So this kid got moved to a regular room, and in 4 days, he was out of the hospital. And I was like, boom, God, all day. And I told everybody, they're like, God, all day, this is so amazing. Well, then we were like, more chemo, and they're like, okay, we want to do an x-ray. So they're like, this kid is this big by now. And they're like, we want to x-ray this much. And the doctor was like, we need to hit his lungs just in case. Weeks of arguing, finally we hit his lungs, and they were like, oh. So we going into this room, and I'm like, after my kid got his liver cut out, I'm like, this kid's cancer-free, right? Boom, celebrating, life is good. And I go into this room with this doctor, and she goes, and I'm like, oh, this is going to suck. And so they go, your son has lung cancer. And I went, oh, are you kidding me? And I was like, I'm going to cry. I'm not going to cry because my wife and her dad are crying. And I'm like, oh, I was like, Dexter, come here, sit on my lap. So I sat him on my lap, and they're just bawling. And I'm like, you're doing good, buddy. You're doing good. You know, I'm like, don't cry. And so I'm sitting there, and so she goes, we want to do a biopsy. So we go to the hospital a couple days later, and they poke it right there. And they're like, ooh, you should do another one. And his lung collapses. It was like, whoop. And I was like, oh no. So we spent a day in the hospital. And they got the biopsy back, and they said, now we want to do surgery? This kid has been in the hospital like 25 times, and I hate hospitals. And I was like, cool, let's go for it. So they cut him right here. They spread his lungs. He had his ribs open, felt his lungs. And they did it on this side. And this kid comes back, and he's got an epidural in his back. And after surgery, the next day, he's doing this in his crib. I'm like, who does this, right? I'm like, you're ridiculous. And all this time, I'm like, dude, God is so good. And then the doctor comes in, and she goes, I'm like, all right, stop it, seriously. She goes, sit down. So I sat down, and Amanda sat down. She goes, your son has rhabdoid cancer. And there's this many cases and this many survivors. I said, my son has a 4% chance to live. And she goes, yeah. I said, you wanted me to take 100 quarters, throw them all in the air, and 4 of them land heads, and the rest of them land tails. She's like, yeah, pretty much. And in that moment, I'm sitting in this chair, and God goes, no more chemo. Not even one drop. No more chemo. Now tell your wife. And I'm like, oh, you can't tell her? You know? And I'm like, okay, honey, psst, we don't need to get any more chemo. She looks at me like, you don't. And I'm like, seriously? God said it. Now let me explain it. And so after a day of explaining, we serve the same God. So she's like, I'm with you. He doesn't need to die with chemo and pain. So at that moment, our friend Jeff, who was always there for me, who God put in my life to always answer a phone and give me God's words, they lived in Nebraska, and I was like, let's go. We got in the car. We made it to Lyman. My kids started puking all the way to Nebraska for 12 hours. Every 30 minutes on the dot, pretty much. We get there, and my son's like, I feel pretty good. I got nothing left, but I feel good. And I'm like, this is stupid. Now I'm sick. So we're hanging out with Jeff and Miranda, and then we stayed there for like 4 days, and I'm having so much fun because my brain's not on Dexter dying. It's not. So we come home. Well, Omaha's 2,000 feet. We're at 7. My kid can't breathe. So we get him there, and we take him to the doctor, and they're like, he needs oxygen, blow by oxygen, so it goes past his face. And I'm standing there, I'm like, okay, cool. 2 days later, all right, he's gonna need a little mask, just a little one over his nose, okay? 2 days later, they're like, he's gonna need a full mask. So we went and bought a chair because this kid was dying. This kid, I could see, was suffering. They gave him more powerful meds than they give most humans that just have issues. This kid had such powerful meds. The tube was this long, and like, you can't even see how big it is. It was so tiny, and he's like, ooh, and he's just, wee, like literally, I have videos, it's kind of funny. Yeah. But he's laying there, and he's out of it. And I'm like, what do we do? What do we do? So we bought this chair, and we're sitting with him, we're sleeping with him in the chair, and he just passed out like, I don't even care anymore. So on the 27th, I wake up and my wife's sitting with him. I walk out into the living room and my wife is bawling her eyes out. And I'm like, uh-oh. And she goes, he can't keep his oxygen saturation up above 65%. We need 95 to 100 to live. This kid is dying in front of me. I call everybody I know. Everybody I know. They all come, Dustin, a bunch of people from the church. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh no. And me, being me, I start making jokes because I'm a monster apparently. And so I'm making these jokes and my wife is sitting down there on her knees and she's holding my son and he's turning colors. So my wife goes, get down here. And everybody's like, get down there. So I'm literally, I go over there like this. My wife goes, here, hold him. And I hold him like this. I've got my hands like this. And I'm just like, what are we doing? You know, and I watch his little chest up and down and up and down. And I just said, goodbye, Mr. Monster. And he died in my living room, in my arms. This little boy who I've known for the last 13 months, 408 days, is now dead. And I was like, oh man, and what do you do at this moment? These people around, they're all saying goodbye, and I'm like, I'm a mess, but I'm still a jerk, so I make more jokes. And so I don't know what to do. I don't know how to handle this. And my wife's bawling, and we had to hand our son to somebody to say, take him and put him in a coffin. So in this very room right here, my son had his coffin, little red coffin. And I stood up here and I thank God for the people that were in my life at that point. Because Dexter pushed me over to Jesus. My friend Jeff walked me as close to Jesus and introduced me. And my son made me put out my hand and said, you will love Jesus with everything that you are. You will love Jesus. And I said, I'm in. That's no big deal. I'm in. Because guys, through everything, through all these things that happened, have you guys heard the story? It's like, where there are two set of footprints, you're walking with Jesus. Where there's one set, Jesus carried you. Well, mine is, and where there's drag marks, Jesus drugged me all the way through this, and that was most of it. Because I was like, I can't do this. But God was faithful. God was amazing. He brought me another son, Alexander, who I love so much. He's bringing me another son, Matthias, who I'm like, I'm so excited. He's going to be a baby and he poops. But you know what? I love him. He brought me Autumn, who's like family. She is family. That girl loves us, and it's awesome. But through all of this hardship and through all of this pain, God said, I'm not going to leave you. I've been here. Where have you been? And I was like, man, I feel like crap about myself. Because God is so epic and God is so awesome. He said, no matter what you have done in your past, no matter the terrible things you've done, I'm here, right here, standing next to you. And I'm like, sorry. You know, because I'm a terrible person. But God goes, no, you're good. You're good. Jesus took it, you're fine. And I'm like, wow. Because my son died, and there were so many people that were there, but there were so many people that ran. There were so many people that ran out of my life and said, I don't want to be in your life because I can't handle what you're going through. And I was like, that hurts my heart, but apparently they don't need to be here. All I needed was God. And that was so amazing because from this moment that I watched my son die, I could only imagine when I think back, I literally think this, when I think back, it's me and my wife and something white, I don't know what this is, it's a person, and then Jesus and my son. And the moment my son died, I feel like Jesus walked over and went, I got it, we're good, I'll see you later. You know, and I was just like, and I had a peace about that. A piece of my son dying, and I was like, praise Jesus, because nobody else can fix that. Nobody else can do that for me.